Thank you, Dan. And it's now my pleasure to bring up Steve Heinz, who I think everybody already knows. So Steve, welcome. Steve's our founder and somebody that I've learned a lot from in the short time that I've been at EnergyCAP. He's going to talk to us a little bit about some of what he's seen in a much longer career in the energy space than I've had, and probably longer than almost everyone in the room. There's one thing that I would like to do before you get started. Forgot to do this on the way in, and I think it'll be even better with both of us in it. Let's do a quick selfie here. All right. Perfect. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks. Well, good morning. Great to see everyone here this morning. I've been asked a number of times what my role is with EnergyCAP since, well, sort of in quotes, retiring. I'm an advisor, I'm on the board, I'm an investor, and I'm the #1 cheerleader. And for any of you who have been cheerleaders in the past, you know, the secret to cheerleading is to have a great team on the field. Makes your job so much easier. And I'm really excited about the executive team we have at EnergyCAP. I've seen firsthand the value of bringing in fresh blood with fresh perspectives, particularly a team that has been in key roles in other software companies in the past. And they bring in fresh ideas, fresh perspectives, fresh relationships, and it brings value to the product and to everyone. And leading that up, Sean Langton is a great fit for this position. A PhD engineer with prior experience running software companies. So he is really an ideal leader for the next season of EnergyCAP. And I'm really pleased, Sean, to have you here and the rest of your executive team. A quick note about Earth Day. Today is the 56th Earth Day, because it started in April of 1970. So this is number 56. And a quick historical note, Earth Day 1972. I was the president of student council in my senior year of high school, and I had a passion for sustainability and for the environment back then. I would say I got that from my father. My father worked for one of the world's largest steel companies, and of course, steel companies are known to be very clean, environmentally sensitive operations, right? I mean, digging huge pits in the ground and using huge amounts of electricity to refine the iron ore. Well, he was a writer for Bethlehem Steel, and he wrote what he called the Pollution Fighters Coloring Book. This was a coloring book with witty verses. He was a lyricist, so he was very good at witty verses. And there were drawings in there that you would have your kids color. For instance, one of the drawings was a car that was belching smog and smoke out of its exhaust pipe. And his witty verse was, "If you like music, you tune your guitar. So if you like breathing, please tune up your car." And he had a whole book of these, 20 or 25 of those kinds of pages. So I thought it would be a good idea as president of student council to encourage the youth of the school district to be conscious of the environment, this being Earth Day 1972. So there was a girl in student council. She had been hitting on me all year. So I said, "Hey, you want to come with me? We're going to go to every elementary school, and we're going to hand out these pollution fighting coloring books. We're going to have a contest," and this was like the 3rd or 4th grade. "And then we're going to collect them, and we'll choose a winner, and we'll give them an award," which is what we did. It worked out very well. We were encouraging the elementary students. And the girl I did this with, we will celebrate our 49th anniversary in this June. So here. So you see, environmental awareness always ends on a happy note. What I'm going to talk about this morning is looking at a long view of energy efficiency, looking back at the 50 years that I've been involved in it, because sometimes looking at a long view adds perspective to the current view and the view of the future. So 50 years of energy efficiency. First of all, what was going on the national scene? Gerald Ford was president. No one outside of Georgia had ever heard of Jimmy Carter. Was founded, Microsoft. Pete Rose was named Sportsman of the Year and a sure bet to be in the Hall of Fame in the future. It was the premiere of Saturday Night Live and Jaws and The Land Shark. We evacuated Saigon. It was a very chaotic evacuation, but fortunately, our government leaders learned a lot from that to make sure we would never again have a chaotic evacuation of a country. Global cooling was the big concern of the day. Now you might say, why global cooling? Well, what had happened was there had been a few years where the weather data in North America showed that the trend was a downward trend. It really wasn't enough years of data to draw any conclusions, but a journalist with Newsweek had blown it up into a big news article. So everyone was talking about global cooling. The reason why the temperatures had trended down was because of emissions from coal-fired plants, particularly the particulates and the sulfur in the emission from coal plants were basically reflecting some of the sun's energy and causing a slight cooling trend. And we also had problems with acid rain and so on because of the emissions from coal plants. And I should also mention, this is also an item of note, is that last month, March of 2025, was a milestone in that it was the first month in history that in the United States, more kilowatt hours were produced by green energy than by dirty energy. By dirty energy, I mean oil, coal, natural gas. Over 50%, like 50.5%, came from nuclear power, hydro, solar, and wind. So we're halfway there, very notable. Okay, well, that was the national scene. What about the energy scene? What was going on in the field of energy efficiency and energy management? The Arab-Israeli war had started in October of 1973, and the oil-producing nations had banded together because the United States was resupplying Israel, and they said, we're going to put an embargo on oil shipments to the US. So basically overnight, oil supply was cut off. US production of oil had been steadily declining, so the US was short hundreds of millions of gallons of oil per day. As a result of that, the oil companies, who we can always count on to take advantage of any kind of a crisis situation, raised the price of gasoline. I remember back then, gas had been running 39, 40 cents a gallon. It had shot up to 60 cents a gallon. And you're saying, 60 cents, what are you complaining about? But it was like a 50% increase in the cost of gas. It really was a shock, and it was big news at the time. On the HVAC scene, there were a few HVAC manufacturers. They pretty much controlled the market. Everything that you would purchase would be from one of the large manufacturers. Innovation was limited to the large manufacturers. There really was not like there is today, an environment of startups and innovation. And one of the reasons for that was the venture capital sector was just getting started. Today, there's billions of dollars in the hands of venture capitalists and private equity, and they use that to invest in promising companies. There's very little of that back in 1975. So there weren't a lot of startups, and there was not a lot of innovation. There were no energy services companies. There was no Association of Energy Engineers. There was no performance contracting. That idea really hadn't come to fruition yet. There was no measurement and verification of savings. And there was no deregulated electricity or gas. So it was a very, very different world 50 years ago. So I enter into that as an energy manager, and I saw my job as being, well, stated here, pretty simple, but to accomplish a lot of these things was difficult. But I looked at the three marching orders. Was number one, to turn it off. If something's on that doesn't need to be on, turn it off. Number two, if you can't turn it off, at least set it back, turn it down. You might not be able to turn off the heat overnight, but you can set it back to a nighttime setting. So turn it off, number one, set it back, number two, and number three, tune it up. And I put that in quotes because it doesn't mean, I'm not saying just tune up a boiler to make it run more efficiently. Tune up your buildings by putting insulation in the buildings or storm windows. Tune up your utility bills by making sure you're on the right rate schedule and there's no errors and you're not paying for tax when you're a tax-exempt organization, things like that. So tune up everything involved in your buildings and everything having to do with your energy consumption. So after 5 years as energy manager, so now we're in 1980 or so, 1981, it became clear to me really what the future of energy management was. I had hands-on for 5 years trying to manage, I was in the Air Force at the time, a large Air Force base, many different buildings, most of them weren't sub-metered, and people didn't really care too much about energy conservation. So that was the environment I was in. What became very clear to me was that the future was technology and data. So understanding that, the first thing I did was kicked toddler John out of his bedroom, and brought in a cutting-edge Radio Shack computer about the size of the refrigerator in my hotel room here. Still in my pajamas. I was so eager to do this, right when the technology became available. And I said, what is needed is software to manage data, because the data is so valuable. And without it, as an energy manager, I really couldn't do my job. I couldn't determine which buildings were using the most, what buildings had the greatest change year to year, all those kinds of things. The data was important. So I set about developing some tools to use technology to manage data. So I would say the first lesson learned that I want to say this morning is it's shown me over 50 years that technology was really what was driving energy efficiency for 50 years. Things like direct digital controls replacing pneumatics. If you go back 50 years, 60 years, some of you might even find this hard to believe, control systems in buildings were controlled by compressed air. Somewhere in the building, you had an air compressor and you had tubes that ran throughout the building, and the compressed air would run to the thermostat, and when the thermostat said turn on, it would send compressed air to a valve, and the air would open the valve and hot water would flow into a radiator or something. And then when you would do an energy audit of the building to find out what was going on, you would find more often than not that in a mechanical room somewhere, a rodent had chewed through one of the pneumatic tubes and it was leaking air, and control systems just weren't working anymore. EMSs replaced time clocks. 50 years ago, you had time clocks in buildings for setbacks. So the clock went around in a circle, there were little pins in there. And again, doing an energy audit, you'd open it up, look in and find all the pins had been removed, and they're all sitting down the bottom of the time clock. They were hard to manage. LEDs over 50 years have replaced pretty much all lighting technologies, and there have been multiple generations of lighting technologies that we've all gone through. You probably still have some compact fluorescents in some of your buildings. LEDs have taken over. High efficiency boilers and furnaces are something of the last 50 years. Insulating glass. Back in the day, we didn't have thermal pane windows. We had storm windows, which were, well, better than not having a storm window, but it was inefficient. Foam insulation is a result of technology, and Tyvek building wrap. Low flow plumbing. Back in the day, 7 gallons per flush was pretty standard for a toilet. Now toilets are more like 1.5 gallons. That's a pretty significant improvement in efficiency. Occupancy sensor controls are very commonly used. Variable speed fans have replaced constant speed fans. So as a result of technology and innovation, all of these things have come about in the last 50 years. However, looking at technology, you need to keep in mind the standard, basically a business school type of technology adoption curve. If you look at just about any kind of technology that has come out, and I mean telephones, televisions, cell phones, fax machines, microwave ovens, you name it, it follows this kind of a curve. You have early adopters, and then at some point it kind of becomes mainstream, and at the long end of that are the laggards. So I've observed that over these years as well. Some of the new technologies have come out, and you would think they'd be adopted very quickly, but in reality, it takes time for things to be adopted, particularly in buildings, because it can be expensive to update mechanical systems in buildings. There are about 6 million non-residential buildings in the US, total of about 100 billion square feet. So there's a lot of building stock out there, and it takes a long time for buildings to become upgraded. My third lesson learned is about utility bills. One of the first things that I had to do as an energy manager was verify the utility bills that we were getting on the Air Force Base that I worked at. And they were difficult back then. They've gotten much worse over time. And not only have they gotten much worse, but the utility companies really have not invested to the level that telecom companies have invested and so on in making utility bills, basically invoices, easy to process, easy to deal with, standardized technology, things like that. The first utility bill on record, the first electric bill, I should say, on record was sent by Thomas Edison's company. Thomas Edison built the first commercial generating plant in Manhattan in 1882. They apparently, the electricity was free for the first couple months. They were trying to hook their neighbors. And they sent the first electric bill, or handed the first electric bill, in 1883. It was for $50.40. Thomas Edison, engineer, thought, well, this might be someday, notable. So when the customer paid it in cash, Edison's chief engineer annotated one of the $1 banknotes that this was the first dollar that came in from a commercial electric bill. And it did turn out to be valuable. It was sold at auction, about 10 years ago for $15,000. Now, why are utility bills so hard to deal with? Well, start to look at the number of vendors out there. Just looking at electric vendors, There's 166 IOUs. Those are the big investor-owned utilities like Georgia Power and Southern Cal Edison. 166 of them. Add to that the municipally owned electric companies, 2,000 of those, over 800 co-ops, which are customer-owned electric distribution companies. That's about 3,000 just electric vendors, and that doesn't include those marketers of deregulated electricity. That adds to the number. If you want to look at water and sewer, that's a huge number of vendors. A lot of those are very small. They're small municipal vendors. They might only have a couple hundred customers. And there's no standardization across any of these vendors with what a utility bill looks like. So there's a lot of different bill formats. If you go to the Department of Energy's database on utility rates, it shows that there's 61,000 electric rates in the US. That's a lot of different formats to deal with. So no wonder why it is such a challenge to get data from utility bills into software accurately. The government has taken a stab at this. EDI 810 is was a Department of Commerce initiative back in the 90s for an electronic format for utility bills, EDI 810. It has not been widely adopted, but we do have quite a few customers who use EDI 810 for those vendors that offer it to ingest that into EnergyCAP. Green Button is another White House mandated initiative to make energy data available from the vendors. Those aren't live bills. It's more of consumption data after the fact. And a lot of utility companies have dragged their feet on that. An interesting nonprofit to follow, if any of you are interested in this, is Mission Data. Mission Data is a nonprofit. It's run by a fellow who was in the energy space. He also has a law degree. Mission of this Mission Data is to try to make energy data more readily attainable across the country. So they file lawsuits on behalf of commission hearings and present expert data. So that's all that they're about. And it's interesting to read the newsletters to see how much resistance there is to it across the country. And you say, why are people fighting this? Isn't this a good thing to make my data more readily available to me so I can use it to manage my buildings? A good example is New Hampshire. 6 years ago, the governor of New Hampshire, Sununu, signed into law a law that all the utility companies had agreed to create a state of New Hampshire energy platform so that any energy consumer could very readily log in and download their consumption data. 6 years ago, it still hasn't, they haven't even issued the RFP yet for it because there's been resistance by the public utility commissions and other committees, and they've just stonewalled this thing. Now, why did they do that? You know, I don't really know the answer in New Hampshire. In some cases, people say, well, we don't want to raise the price of energy because someone's got to pay for it, and it's going to be the ratepayers, the customers are going to pay for it because who else would pay for it? And we think it's bad press to say rates are going up because we're paying for this platform. But really, in the big scheme of things, it's probably just a tiny drop in the bucket. But the point being that easy and open access to data is really a challenge, and you would think that utility companies would encourage it. No, in a lot of cases, they fight against it. Look at smart meters. The government has chipped in for 120 million smart meters that have been installed. Yet how easy is it for you to grab the data on a near real-time basis from your own smart meters. It's difficult. So that's an important lesson learned, hopefully. My fourth lesson learned is, as a result of the bill complexity and the lack of access, outsourcing has become much more popular. It was unheard of 50 years ago. It was around the year 2000 that outsourcing really started to pick up a lot of momentum. We had created a bill processing operation in about 1997. It was very manual at that time, and customers would fax us copies of their utility bills, things like that. But it really started to take off around 2000, particularly in the retail sector, like the Walmarts and the Targets of the world. They realized that if they would outsource the bill processing for those that had thousands or tens of thousands of invoices, they could reduce some head count in their accounting department, and they could get the data into the system quicker, easier, better. So it really took off, and it has been growing substantially since. So what are some of the advantages of as I mentioned, you might be able to can certainly reduce a lot of hours of someone's work, and they can do other things. It also eliminates the need to have knowledgeable people on your staff. You know, I probably don't have to tell you this. It's hard to hire and retain people who understand utility bills and can stick with the entry of utility bills into a system. A lot of organizations have just found that those kind of people aren't available because you're all here in this room. But beyond that, it's just hard to find. Outsourcing it removes that problem. Outsourcing it also increases the accuracy and the amount of data that you're capturing. Now, I know some of you might feel like, I don't need all the line items on the bill. I need to know the amount due and the due date, and I need to know the consumption, and I need to know probably my peak demand. But all the other stuff, I don't have any use for that data. However, moving into an AI world, data is king. And we're going to be finding, and we have found already, that more data, more line items are valuable because it can help in verifying the bill. It can bring additional insights. It can help when you're deciding if this is the best rate schedule to be on. So there is value in that. And that's why when we run bill capture and we capture people's bills, we want to get all the line items because there is value to be gained from that. And finally, some people might think, well, it seems like it's more expensive to outsource bill processing. But when you look at the cost of systems, the cost of personnel, there have been multiple studies done on in-house processing, not just of utility bills, but of any kind of an invoice versus outsourcing, that outsourcing in the long run generally is cheaper. My next lesson learned is looking forward to the future. Let's say look forward 25 years. I wouldn't look forward 50 years because it'll be all Tesla robots in 25 years. So who knows what's going to happen after 2050. Everything we hear about these days is got the word smart in it. We hear about smart grids, making the whole grid smarter. You know, and it's an interesting sidelight that you hear talk about AI making the grid smarter because there's going to be a lack of power at certain times during the day. And the main reason why there's going to be power shortages is because of AI in the data centers. So AI is causing an increase in power consumption. Hopefully AI can at the same time sort of come to the rescue to optimize the grid and the use of batteries and renewables and all that kind of thing. We hear about integrated smart building systems, where all the systems in the building are integrated. I was talking to the engineering department head at Penn State recently, and he was saying we really have to totally rethink the way we teach building design and the integration and design of systems in buildings, because AI is going to play such a big role in this in the future. So we're going to design buildings differently. We're not even quite sure how that's going to be. But he said, the big problem that everyone's talking about is we're going to need to train AI so it can assist us in designing buildings. But to train AI, we need data. Where are we going to get the data to train AI to design more efficient buildings? And to that, I just raised my hand. I said, I know where you can get the data. You know, we need to talk some more about this. So that is coming. Integrated renewables and battery storage is going to be a real key, so that energy can be stored when it's plentiful, and then it can be used during those times of day when the grid is becoming overloaded. Variable occupancy is a big challenge and a big opportunity. We have buildings now, because of remote work, that are not full, at least to the design spec. So how do you take advantage of that? In our office building, for instance, when we design the system, we design the code compliant says how many square feet do you have in the building, and we assume the building is full, so this is how much ventilation you need. And then on the days where there's 10 people in the building, not 100 people in the building, we're bringing in much more outside air than we need. Well, in the middle of winter, when it's 10 degrees outside, you don't want to bring in excess outside air and then heat it up. And in the summer, you don't want to bring in excess outside air and have to dehumidify it and cool it. So there's a big challenge with variable occupancy, yet a huge opportunity. And it's going to take smarter systems to handle that. But in all these things, remember, adoption takes time. So we can talk about the smart building of the future. Today, we're like right there. We're just getting to the uptake of it. So it's going to take time. Now is a good time to prepare. So I would say lesson number 6 is the importance of energy data over my 50 years in this space has grown significantly over time. And really, when you look at any of the smart technologies out there, data is the key to all of these technologies. None of them can function without data. So the approach is still the same: turn things off, set it back, tune it up. But that will be done not so much by an energy manager running around. It'll be done by driven and enabled by data. So the story that here's, as I see it, is that AI requires training. Training requires data. And there's really 2 streams here. There's the interval data stream, which AI can use to optimize the systems in a building. And there's also utility bill AI, where AI can verify utility bills, make sure you're on the rate, make sure the bills are reasonable, things like that. There's seasonality in your data, because there's seasonality in how buildings are used. So to think that, in the future, I'm going to get a smart building control system and I'll feed it a month's worth of interval data or a month's worth of utility bills and it'll be good to go, that's not going to be the case. You're going to need years of data because of the seasonality. for the system to operate. That's my vision of the future. You're going to need a lot of data. So if you need a lot of data over a lot of years, time to start preparing for an AI future by making sure that you're using bill capture and EnergyCAP to get detailed utility bill data and smart analytics to get interval data. The more data you have, the more valuable it will be to you and the more effective you'll be in your jobs. So that's the future as I see it. I wish you all the most success in your jobs in the future, and thank you very much.